Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video we take a quick look on all the procedural textures Blender offers, and after this I show you how we can put them to good use to create the color of our object, bump map, and also a roughness map. Alright, without further words, let's get started. When I hit Shift A, texture, we find a lot of textures. Usually if we want to import an image, we go on image texture, and then we can open an external image. But this we don't want to do right now. We want to take a look on the other things we have here. And I will quickly go through all of them and show you what they do. So let's take a brick texture, connect this with the base color. And now you will see on the surface of the object what is happening. So let's take a look from above. So as you can see, this is a brick texture, as the name already said it. And for every procedural texture, we have different values here, which we can adjust. For example, the scaling, or how big the lines between the bricks should be. We can define different colors if we like, and so on. That means every procedural texture offers different values we can adjust. That means also if we are use them later for creating a material, it's super easy to create different variations of the same material super quick by just adjusting some of those values. With X, I delete this one and let's create the checker. So this is a checker texture, like on a chessboard, for example. Here you can control the colors of the two squares here and also the size. The environment texture is not a procedural texture. This you will use to add HDRI maps to your background, but this is a completely different topic. Let's take a look at the gradient texture. This basically adds a gradient to your object. You can choose between, for example, if it should be spherical or just linear from one side to the other. You can see it here a little bit in the ear. It's going from black to white. The next one is a magic texture. This one looks weird at the beginning, but if I scale it down, you can see this repeating pattern in here. And this is useful if you, for example, want to quickly create something like fabric. And for this we can use it. And don't worry, because sometimes these textures are just colorful, but I will show you how to use them properly. So then next one is Musgrave. This is something like a noise texture. Here we have different values to control how this noise should look like, how much details we want to have, and stuff like this. And here you pretty good can see that this texture is mapped all over the cat. Without that we can see any seam, and this is awesome. So let's go over to the next one, my favorite one, the noise texture, because it's super simple, but in general very useful. So you rarely can see it, but it's just a colorful noise which is projected on the cat here. And here again we can control the size and also how much details we want to have in there. Then this two we don't need here. Then we have the Voronoi, which is also pretty interesting. Let's increase the scale. On the one hand, it's creating this kind of cells, but with a spherical shape in them. And if we change it to cells, then you can see how the cells are in actual fact looking like. We have this mosaic pattern here, which is also pretty interesting for some cases. And the last one here is a wave texture. Let's add this. This is basically adding these lines to our object. We can, for example, control how much lines we want to have, and then we can distort them. And then the whole thing gets interesting, as you can see. This you can use, for example, to create cracks or also wood or something like this. But yeah, about the details we will talk later. Up here you can also change to rings. So if I not distort this, you can see it has more like a ring shape here. Yeah, and that are basically all of the procedural textures we have here. And now let's take a look on how we can use them properly. So for this we need a basic understanding. Let's add under color the mix RGB node connected with the base color. And be careful, it's something different than the mix shader, because the mix shader is only there to mix these green channels with each other. That means shaders. The yellow channels are for color, RGB, and the gray channels are for numeric information or just black and white basically. So With this mix shader, I can basically mix two colors. Like let's take red and green. And up here we have this mix factor. So if I put this down to 0, you can see only the upper input is used. And if I put this up to 1, you can see only the lower input is used. And in this case, we can mix those two values here. But how can we now use a procedural texture? So for example, let's simply add the very simple noise texture. And what we also use a lot is under converter the color ramp. This color ramp basically converts a color image into black and white, and then we can control how much black and how much white we will have in the image. So there's one cool add-on I quickly want to show you under the user preferences. This is called Node Wrangler. Enable this, and this basically gives us a lot of new shortcuts for the node editor. And there's one thing in particular which I really like, and this is pressing Ctrl Shift and then left click on a certain node, and this will show us what happens in the node chain to this point. And if you want to remove this new viewer node, which then will appear, just click Shift Ctrl left click on the last shader before the material output node, and then you can see this will removed and the last shader will be connected again. The noise texture, as you can see, is this colorful thing, and this I plug into the color ramp, and here this will be converted into black and white. And now if I move these handles closer together, you can better see it. We're now increasing the contrast basically. And now let's increase the scale a bit, like 50. And if I zoom in here, you can see if I put the details down to 0, this is very smooth here. And if I increase this, we have much more details here. And now we have this black and white image projected onto the surface of our cat. And this black and white information we can now use as factor input. Basically, black means 0, that means the upper input, and white means 1, the lower input. That means on the surface here, on all the black areas, the red color will be displayed, and on all the white areas here, the green color will be displayed. And in all the grayscale values, there we have a mixed factor of those two here. So let's connect this with this value here, and then you also can see that this disappears. Now let's take a look into this here, and now you can see the black and white are replaced by the red and green. And now you can see pretty quick I have this red-green cat. And basically you can use any black and white texture. You also can use image textures which are black and white. You can use anything which is black and white, use this as factor and mix certain colors together. Instead of these colors here, we also can use other textures like image textures or also noise textures, for example. Let's plug them in here. And now you can see everything what was red before is now colored in this colorful way. So in this, certainly we can drive even further. To make a very simple example, I just duplicate this node here, plug this into one color, then let's duplicate this two here, and maybe decrease the scaling. That means we have now a very big noise texture here. And now we can basically mix a third color into this, like blue. Now we have this one here. This whole thing we take as one color, and then we have the blue color down here. And here we use again this texture to define the mix factor. And in this way we basically can mix as many textures as we like. So that means by mixing and combining different procedural textures, we can create new textures. Imagine that all the stuff which we are building here together is just one color texture. It is basically the same thing as if you would import a texture, image texture, and just use one texture which already includes a lot of different colors. All this thing here is just one thing which is defining the base color of our object in the end. Then there are two other things I like to do to just get a very quick but more or less realistic result. And what I mean is a roughness map and a bump map. And in most cases, since I'm super lazy, I'm just generating this out of the color map I have here. So for the bump map, I add a vector bump node connect this with the normal input of the principal shader and connect the color output to the height. You can see the color output is yellow. That means this output is color, but this input is gray. That means this color will be automatically transferred into black and white. So let's take a look into this bump node. And as you can see, now we have this uneven surface. But it's not a real uneven surface, just the light will behave like virtually this is uneven. But if you take a closer look and see the shape here, the silhouette, it will absolutely stay the same. And with the strength value, you can control how much of this bump map you will have. And in this way, you can super quick and easy add this very tiny details to your textures. And this will also affect the glossiness of your object. And then the last thing is a roughness map. By this I mean I want to control the roughness so that on some areas the roughness is stronger and in some areas the roughness is weaker. And here we will again use the same trick as before by adding a converter color ramp, plug this into the roughness value here and use our color as base input here. Now let's take a look what this does. Again, transfers the color into black and white. We can control the roughness here. And the roughness value basically says 0 is completely glossy. That means black is completely glossy. And 1, white, will be completely rough. On the texture, that means on all the black areas we have a lot of glossiness. And on all the white areas we have a very smooth reflection. So let's see how this looks like. So let's adjust this so that we just have a little black and most of the thing is white. And now you can see here on the surface, it looks like this is a little bit wet. And for example, if you don't want to have that strong black areas in here, you can select the black handle and just put a little bit more white into this. That means we have more rough glossiness in general. Or you can darken the white color here. That means you have more reflection or more hard reflection in the white areas basically. And in this way you can easily control the roughness. And only these three things, a color map, a roughness map and a bump map, are defining our material pretty quick and realistic. So certainly instead of using just the color we have created here as input for the roughness and the bump map, we also can, for example, use something completely different. Let's just, for example, take the Voronoi texture and plug this into the height value here and increase the scaling here. And then you can see we have this very interesting cell pattern on the surface. And now this will be used as bump map. And in this way you certainly can combine different things together. Also for the roughness map we can use, let's say, the magic texture, which is creating this very interesting pattern here to define our roughness. So, and as you can see, just by plugging some of these weird textures together, this already looks pretty interesting. Yeah, this looks like art. You know, art can be anything, maybe. The very cool thing about procedural textures are that we can use them for any object. We don't need to UV unwrap anything. We just can, for example, go to the materials, left click and hold on the material library button and drag the material onto other objects. And as you can see, this will just work fine. Yeah, and in this way you can easily create a few shaders which you then can use for as many objects as you like. There's just one thing I wanted to show you, which is pretty important. As you can see right now here, the scaling is different on the certain objects according to the size of our object. And that's because all these textures are using the generated UV coordinates as standard. But we can change this. Let's go to Input, Texture Coordinates, and usually it uses automatically this generated. That means if I plug this generated in all of these textures here, you can see that nothing is changing. But I would recommend instead of this generated to use the object input. Let's do this quickly. And now you can see the scale of all the things are exactly the same from all the different objects. And this is a great benefit of this object coordinates. That means the texture will not scale according to the size of the object. The only thing that you have to take care about, if you scale an object in object mode, you can see the procedural texture will also scale with this. And this has something to do with the scaling factor we have here. I already covered this in another video. So you just have to press Ctrl A, apply the scale, and then you can see this is back normal again. So now you really can drag and drop this material onto any object and it will always look the same in terms of scaling. How cool is that? So, and if we like, we now can, for example, add a little bit of subsurface scattering. And I want to have the base color we have created here also as subsurface scattering color. And let's increase this to 0.5, for example. And now we also have this little bit of subsurface scattering here. Yeah, and as you can see, now we have a lot of creative freedom to create any kind of material. Certainly not everything is possible with procedural textures, but in many cases procedural textures are pretty useful.